No, stop it. No, can't pause.
ultimately driving down, thank you, have ultimately been driving down the life expectancy. Anybody have an idea of what the average lifespan of a US adult is?
Is it 75?
A little bit higher, but that's close, Leah. 77.8 years. And again, since the last time this was done, it is 1 year less life expectancy. So just being born into this country, you have a likelihood that your age at death is an average of 77.8 years old. Okay. Now, who do we think has the longest, when we think about race and ethnicity demographics, who has the longest life expectancy?
Caucasian?
So I'm hearing Caucasian, I'm hearing white women. Tulika?
Japanese people.
Close, but actually, here's a problem again with our data that we talked about last week. Data doesn't dig into that far into ethnicities. So what we actually know is that Hispanic females have the longest life expectancy at around 83 years. But you're right that white females are up there at 80 years. So both of those are above the national average. Okay. And then next we have Hispanic males that are slightly below the national average. Who do we think comes next in life expectancy out of, and I guess I could have given that, so Hispanic, white, Black, African-American would be our main areas.
White men.
White men. Oh, no, sorry, Black females. Sorry. So white men and then Black men have almost 10 years less on their life expectancy averages than the national average. So these are important things to keep in mind when we're talking about, this is typically developing populations, right? So today we're going to talk about the impacts of disability layered with the impacts of systemic racism on top of all of that. And the impacts on health and quality of life ultimately in public health terms, and Ramya can kind of share with us, we think about it as your quality of life years, right? That's how it's determined and discussed in public health and in kind of national databases is how long are you alive? How long you were alive and healthy? And in public health, it's how long are you alive and healthy and not disabled, because we still have a long way to go in the field of public health to look at disability as a natural experience, and that it's not a negative thing to have a disability. So anybody know what this map is? Yes, it is a map of Cincinnati. And what I want to point out is that the lightest kind of tealish blue that you see there in North Avondale, Paddock Hills, Mount Lookout, and Mount Lookout, Columbia, Tusculum, those have the highest life expectancy. And the darker the color is the lowest life expectancy. So we see that in Avondale, Evanston, Walnut Hills, Camp Washington. So you can kind of see these pockets, and we are literally in Avondale. So we are in one of the most unhealthy, shortest life expectancy neighborhoods in the city of Cincinnati. And so when I pull this up because I wanted to make a point of, in Mount Lookout, you happen to be born into a family that lives in Mount Lookout. You live in Mount Lookout most of your life. You get educated in Mount Lookout. You have groceries bought and consumed in Mount Lookout. Your life expectancy is closer to 90 years. But if you're born in Lower Price Hill, you might not even reach your 70th birthday. That is a difference of 25 years of life. Can you imagine what quality of life you're missing out on if you're missing 25 years? I don't know though. Jen and I always say, put us out to pasture when I can't get up the steps in DWP anymore. Just I'm done. However, that all kidding aside, 25 years of life just based on your zip code, no other factors at all, right? So when we think about that, that has a lot to do with the life course. And so we're going to talk about a little bit more today, historical timing, some of these impacts. But I wanted to clarify, life expectancy is a major measure of health of a society and of a population. And that is some of the ways in which that we measure it is based on zip code. And there are different databases and ways that you can explore whether or not a community is at risk based on the different social determinants that we'll talk about in a few weeks that are available within that community or within that population. Another term that we wanted to clarify is life cycle. This one you've probably heard a lot more because we all had this in basic biology classes, right? The life cycle of a tadpole, the life cycle of a human. So this is the regular predictable series and life stages. This is the stuff that's near and dear to my heart because it's all about developmental milestones and promoting developmental monitoring and screening and making sure kids that are at risk might get those needed services at the right time, in the right place, with the right quantity. So, right, this is what we expect. We expect that, you know, we hit certain milestones by age 1, we hit certain milestones by age 5, we hit certain milestones by age 18, that kind of thing. And so when we talk about the life course, it's taking the life cycle and applying that with these developmental trajectories that are shaped by the context within which we live. So this might be a little hard to see from far away, but up close, this is an old image, but it is an image that is used across public health when we think about life course, is that when you have a trajectory, which is that thick black line up at the top, or a trajectory is the dotted black line at the bottom, you see quality, right, as we go through the reproductive potential, and then across is the lifespan, right, age, puberty, that kind of thing. And so the more protective factors or green arrows pushing, bolstering up the person's health, wealth, ability to own property, ability to maintain a job, all of those protective factors are making their reproductive potential higher, right? Their ability to continue on. It's Darwin, right? Evolution. Now, the more there's red or risk factors pushing down, that's going to impact that life trajectory. So this is just the typical old math class XY axis. Does the person or child that we're talking about have a positive trajectory where it's going up and over, right? It's never going to keep going up because at some point aging happens. Or does it have hills and valleys because of the difficulties and the risk factors? Or is there just very limited potentials across the board? And there's a kind of a plateaued trajectory. So when we define life course, this is the whole interplay of biology, behavior, psychological factors, and those social determinants. And the social determinants can either be protective or risk factors that all impact the health and development of an individual. And I would love to tap on Bailey or Nellie for this green arrow image here is what impacts you in your life is also impacted by your parents' lives before you were ever even thought of. And so if you guys could give your best summary, I'll put you on the spot, of epigenetics, because that is your wheelhouse, at least one of your skill sets to understand epigenetics. Help us. Oh, and let me bring this to you guys. And it's okay with me in Zoom land without the lapel mic, right? Okay. Take a stab, ladies. Yeah, tag team it. Epigenetics. What do we know about it?
All right, so I think to explain epigenetics, we first kind of have to give an overview of genetics. So genetics basically is like the blueprint of how we become ourselves and how we develop into human beings. And the language of that is our DNA. And so at the very basic level, the DNA is kind of like a sentence that is an instruction for just how we're supposed to develop. And when we're talking about epigenetics, we're going one step above that. So we're saying, maybe there's like a crumble in that page with the instructions that prevents us from reading that word. And therefore that instruction, maybe we don't know how to carry that out. So epigenetics is really just about what is hindering those instructions from being read in the cell that affects how we are able to develop in that way.
Yeah, and then I guess epigenetics, like how DNA is passed down from your parents, you're always getting the DNA passed down from your parents. But similarly, epigenetics, even though it's not in the DNA itself, it's like a little thing on top of it. It also can be passed down. So even though it's something that might be like because your mom had a certain experience and that changed her epigenetics, because epigenetics can change, that can still be passed down to her kids, even though it's not in the DNA code itself. So
Perfect. Gosh, you guys nailed it. Thank you. This is why I never do this. I always have our genetic counselors. Tell them next year that they're going to put on the spot in this one. Yeah, no, that's exactly it. It's like whether or not, like it could be any experience, but like what we typically think of as historical trauma. So individuals who were enslaved and forced to have that experience carried that trauma at the cellular level and morphed into being carried through in their DNA and passed on to their offspring and their offspring and their offspring and their offspring. And so it's those kinds of things that we especially think about. And that's what impacts life course is those risk factors, those historical traumas, those difficulties that a person experiences in their life. The fact that maybe they live off of WIC. And if you've ever seen what is available on WIC, it ain't the produce that's fresh at Kroger, right? Like it is the chips, it is the fatty substances, and that has got to change. But that's for another lecture about what we can do about all these things. So the life course theory is this theory or perspective that kind of seeks to understand, explain, and predict, or help improve what are our health and disease patterns. So it's basically taking everything that we do in public health and mixing it with psychology and medicine and social work and all of our different disciplines to say, hey, we can make a difference at not just the individual level, but at the societal level, at the population level. And it's not new, but it's definitely more and more talked about in public health spheres. And so we're going to talk a little bit now, moving into these 6 definitions and concepts. And this will be important as we think through later, either playing the game or applying these topics to what we're going to discuss in the movie clips. So when we think about the life course concepts, there's a acronym, T2E2 or T squared E squared. So when we think about the timeline, my life course is going to be much different than even my parents' life course, even though we share DNA, because they were born in 1958 and I was born in 1984, right? Like there's a definite difference between what was happening in this country, even in the same town in the 50s compared to the 80s. So the timeline and the cumulative differences are longitudinal and add up, right? That also impacts the timing. So for example, I always think about the generations that were born without ever knowing what it was like to not have technology. That is timing, right? That is, you never knew what it was like to not have an instant piece of information at your hands with Google. There's a lot of those people in the workforce now, right? Maybe many of you are sitting in this room, or those people who at a very key point in their development, 9/11 happened and the world changed, right? On 9/11, those people like my son, who the first 3 years of his life are going to be people with masks, right? What is that going to do in terms of timing? So all of these historical impacts on the timing during your critical sensitive periods is important in life course. Yeah, Katie. Can we pass her the mic?
Someone in Zoom might have their hand up.
Oh, I think Laura, you had your hand up earlier just because you were
I didn't know if they had a question.
no. Does anybody have a question though? Thank you for letting me know. Okay, cool. Oh, and sorry. You guys are probably like, hey, where'd Steph go? There we go. I'm gonna try to remember these things. So then environment, the broader environment, what's going on from a biological perspective? So that could be things like the genetics that are passed down, right? What's going on from a social perspective? Is a person born into a certain type of family? The physical or economic impacts, right? Like how much money does a family have to raise the child? All affects the health and development. And then the last E is not really an E, I don't think. I think it's really, we need to be thinking about the inequalities, and the health inequalities are things that we can change, things that are systemic, things that are impacting not just genetics and personal choice, but you don't necessarily have a personal choice to buy a bunch of healthy food if you don't have the money for it, right? So that is all going to be impactful in terms of creating and continuing on health inequities. So T squared, E squared. So we want to think through this timing piece and shaping the health outcomes. And we really have to kind of think through that with a broad lens of being historians to a certain degree, right? Like we know what our life experience was, but do we know what the life experience was of a family member who's experiencing substance use disorder and they were born in the early 90s and what was their life like and on and on and on. So we have to really kind of think through that from the individual level when we're a provider, all the way to the systems level when we're an advocate or a researcher. And how does this time matter? Well, our health changes over time, right? We know that aging is going to decrease our health qualities. Determinants are going to vary over time. So for example, I always think about the time when a few years back, this was before COVID, there was not a great, clean, lovely Kroger in East Walnut Hills. Then they tore that one down and put this beautiful brand new Kroger over in Clifton. But what happened to those people in East Walnut Hills that now it's much further to get to Clifton? So those are the kinds of things that are health determinants. Those are changes in society. Those are changes in policy systems, availability, opportunity that all of a sudden they no longer are easily able to walk to the Kroger to get their food. Even if it was, not the nicest Kroger, it was still fresh food, right? For that neighborhood that no longer exists now. And then how's the relationship between them, right? So it could be a parent dies. How does that impact a health trajectory now for that individual? Or like we said, COVID happening. COVID impacted everybody's health, everybody's lives. And so what is the relationship between those things? Time scales. So we measure time under life course in individual time. So your chronological age, your physical maturation, those social norms, things like, it's a societal norm that people at age 18 should graduate high school and leave the nest. I'm like, huh? Like you're still a child. Anybody know when it's said that our brains are fully developed? What age? At 20, I've been actually seeing 25 to 30. Yeah. So your brains are definitely not developed at 18 when you're supposed to be going out, managing your own money, doing your own laundry, taking care of yourself. And I'm like, I could barely do that at 30. So no wonder. And then I give myself, oh, good. Okay. I got to give myself some grace for the dumb stuff I did when I was 18. Right. And Michelle's like, yes, seeing it right now, play out with my kids. So those kinds of things, like those are social norms. Those aren't based on biology. Those aren't based on the way in which that is rule or fact of the way that we develop. It is our society saying that that's the expectation. Then there's that historical time piece, the calendar year, the technology development, social changes, thinking about the life of a Black person in the South in 1965 versus the Black person in the South now. It's different, not that much different, unfortunately, but it's definitely different based on the social changes in the civil rights movement. So, hold on, let me. Anybody know these names? Andrea Garza, I think I know that one. Okay. Oh, I think Jay's got them. So, okay. Ooh, where did my thing go? There we go. Okay, so this is going to be an opportunity for those of you who are auditory learners to love this. For those of you who are not auditory learners, it might be a challenge. And of course, it's going to be a challenge for me to, where is Zoom? Where is my Zoom bars? I want to make sure I can share the sound. So this is going to be just an audio of an, oh no. I don't know what I did.
Say you saw two kids on a playground, same age, growing up in the same city. Suppose you started wondering about the mystery of what might lead one to do better or worse than the other. What factors could make the difference between prison and college, success and failure, sometimes even life and death? Researchers at Johns Hopkins University began a study some 30 years ago to examine just that. They followed nearly 800 kids in Baltimore from first grade into their late 20s. The team recently published what they found, and what made the difference comes down to two words: money and family. NPR's Juana Summers reports.
Monica John Doe didn't have an easy life growing up in Baltimore in the early 80s.
I remember being so immune to death, so immune to shootings, killings. I just remember, wanting them to rush, get the body out the way so we can get back to playing hopscotch or dodgeball.
Things weren't just bad outside in her neighborhood. Life at home was rough too.
It was really hot, no air condition, barely, gas and electric, rodents. It was just very miserable.
And that's just the start. John Doe's parents have long struggled with drugs and alcohol. And she says her older brothers still do.
They spent pretty much all of their life being incarcerated. It was a very long time before either one of them was home at the same time.
And John Doe's story is typical among the kids the researchers followed. So how can a child with the deck stacked against her still get out and get ahead?
Play by the rules, work hard, apply yourself, and do well in school, and that will open doors for you.
That's Carl Alexander at Johns Hopkins University. This study has been his life's work. Now that it's published, he's retiring. He says those cliches don't really apply to all kids.
It's only half true in the sense that it really works best for children of privileged family background whose parents went to college or had college degrees and have steady work in middle-class positions.
Alexander found among the Baltimore kids his team studied that a child's fate is generally fixed at birth by the strength of her family and her parents' financial status. Those kids who got a better start because their parents were married and working ended up better off. Most of the poor kids from single-parent families stayed poor. Just 33 children out of nearly 800 moved from the low-income to high-income bracket, and a similarly small number of kids born low-income had college degrees by the time they turned 28. Monica John Doe didn't go away to college. She barely got out of Baltimore, just about 10 miles to Parkville, Maryland. Here's where John Doe's story is unusual.
When I had my son, I knew right off the bat I wanted things to be different for him.
As a child, John Doe may not have had money or a supportive family, but as a parent, she was determined that her kids would have both. She's got a good job managing sleep studies that pays her well. She's in a strong relationship and plans to get married. We're sitting in her spotless house in Parkville. Her son Romeo and daughter Makai are upstairs.
Makai, come here.
They're both on the honor roll. Makai, 8, is in a gifted and talented program, and Romeo, 17, is looking at colleges. When asked, how do you like living here, in this house? Makai says,
my mom tells me about the stories, how she used to live in her childhood, and I like that it's better because she gives me support on stuff, and I just enjoy the way it is right now.
And if this new report is any indication, the way things are right now says a lot about where Makai and Romeo will end up. Juana Summers, NPR News.
Okay, so I don't know what happened to our friends in Zoom land. Can no longer see them again. So friends in Zoom land, just make sure that you shout it out, and on the break, I'll ask Jay to come down and help relocate you.
Okay.
I know you're there, but can't see you right now. So what protective factors did we hear in that video clip? For anyone? Go ahead, Lisa.
The 2 kids like Kai, especially being only 8. I'm guessing that's a nicer area of town, has a good education system compared to her mom.
Yeah, so compared to the mom's experience of rodents in the house and filthy circumstances, clean house, nicer neighborhood, probably able to play outside, things of that nature. Yeah, Bethany.
Money and parental education level.
Absolutely, money and parental education level. And those are 2 things that we often see in research studies are what is the income bracket and what is the maternal education. That is a predictor of long-term success. Is the higher the mother's education level, we typically see kids do better. Katie, you were gonna add something? No, similar, same things. Ditto. Yeah, Maria.
Just that she has a stable job.
Stable income, stable job. And it sounds like she likes it, right? It's not just like this grind that she has to go to. And it's like, okay, this pays the bills because I have to, keep a roof over my kid's head and clean clothes on them. But she seemed to like it. Yeah, absolutely. Makes a big difference.
Stable relationship.
Stable relationship. Were you going to say that, Tulika?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the stable relationship is huge. Absolutely. Johnny mentioned that too.
I was just going to say, unlike her brothers, mom doesn't have a substance use disorder.
Exactly. So I think about this a lot because I'm a Facebook scroller. Let's be serious. I have anxiety. We all know that. So I scroll Facebook a lot. And there was this one image and I could not find it to put it in my slides, but it's this like basically breaking the generational curse. And it's an image of like a parent or a grandparent kind of talking at the child, and then the parent talking at the child. And then there's like this barrier up and like breaking the generational curse. And it's like, man, like that takes a lot. It's not a personal choice to break generational difficulties. There's a lot of resiliency, and the resiliency is the systems around an individual to be able to break those patterns of addiction, mental illness. And those aren't necessarily choices, right? They're how you navigate the systems to get the care that you need. Poor parenting breeds poor parenting, and we parent the way we were parented. And that's just the way that it is. That's why I have a job, thankfully, because I like to do that. I like to help coach parents parent in a different way than they were parented. So that meets their children's needs. And those are things that then going to therapy is a protective factor, right? Getting the medical care that you need for yourself or that your child needs, those are protective factors. And we heard a lot of those risk factors in the mom's life. And then so many of those things that she said, I don't want it this way for my kids. And she had the supports and systems to make protective factors for her kids. So great. Thank you guys. Oh gosh, what did I do now? There we go. Oh, protective factors are good. Risk factors, harmful. Clearly, my graphics that you're gonna love. This is just that similar pathway trajectory that shows what we know typically for the health and development of white children versus Black children, particularly African-American boys, have far more risk factors in this country than any other demographic. And so that's just what this is showing. And I know it's old, but it's still there. So we'll keep showing it till it's different. But pathways and trajectories, again, are those curves? Are those curves in the line? How do they build up? How do they have hills and valleys over time? And those individual patterns vary, but we can base our decisions and our policy choices and our research funding on what is the population trends over time. So what do we know about inner city schools in the turn of the century? They had poor educational outcomes. Hence, here comes Teach for America. We're going to plop middle to upper class white ladies in inner city schools across the country. And you can't see my smirk, but it's worked in some regards. But what's really worked is dumping lots of government funding into those education programs to build protective factors. What we did was build one type of protective factor that we said, you 22-year-old teacher, just got your degree, you're going to be this stable factor in this classroom's life. But in addition to that, Teach for America is going to be a program that builds in lots of after-school curricular activities, lots of big brother, big sister programs, all of that. And that's why programs like Teach for America have had some positive outcomes, right? Because we looked at that population trajectory of the education outcomes for some of those failing inner city schools. So when we think about, we kind of talked about pathways and trajectories, but the early programming has such an impact on later development. And we know this even more from the studies on adverse childhood experiences than ever before. But these early experiences can really kind of program and set the blueprint for the individual's health across their entire life. So there's the prenatal programming, then there's any kind of intergenerational programming through that, and then those early life experiences. So if and I see this all the time with kids with substance use disorder or prenatal opioid exposure, born into a family of someone with substance use disorder, and then they're put into foster care. And then they maybe are with that foster family for the rest of their lives. And the foster family comes to see me because there's behavior concerns or, executive functioning issues. And I'm like, this child will always have that early life experience of being separated from their biological mother. Like, there is no way around that. Early life experience is going to be detrimental to the long-term development. That is a risk factor that is far outweighs a lot of the love and care and attention that you could ever provide. You have to work through it. It's always going to be there, right? It's always going to be there. Those early life experiences they don't just get pushed off to the side because something positive happens. That's not how it works. One risk factor doesn't outweigh one protective factor, right? So early programming, very, very important. But I also don't want you to take away that it's deterministic. Just because you were, prenatally exposed, or you had a birth insult, or you had, you fell out of a tree house when you were 2 years old and have a traumatic brain injury, that sets the stage and it's negative forever. Like, that's not what this theory is saying. It's just saying that those experiences are going to impact you in one way, shape, or another. So I know my speech friends have seen this a lot, and probably a lot of you have, but we start developing those pathways in our brain long before we enter the world. And so things like that are in the brainstem and in our spinal cord and brainstem are going to happen first. So those sensory pathways, vision, hearing, motor development, all is before we're even born, right? That's where the predominant development occurs. Language is occurring, right? You see that peak over those first few years of life. And again, those higher cognitive processes, this actually needs to be updated. It's like really old, obviously. But we know that actual red line in higher cognitive functioning goes out way further into the late 20s. So we know early experiences. That's why early intervention was created in this country to be birth to 3 years old, because we know those are the 3 most important years. Now, in European countries and in some other countries, it goes until 5 years old. Because why? Why would it go to 5 years old and in America it only goes till 3? Anybody? Money. It costs money to run those programs. And it's cost a lot of money, billions of dollars actually, to run early intervention across the different states. And so, but we know that's why we put our money into early intervention because those early life experiences are incredibly important. We also have to consider those critical and sensitive periods. So it's not just the first 3 years, but there's some really important milestones that go on in early childhood, right? School age, social emotional development, peer interactions, being able to make friends, keep friends, adolescence. Oh my gosh, puberty. Who enjoyed puberty? No. And especially those parents who are having kids having gone or going through puberty, terrible, right? But there's everybody goes through those milestones. And then that transition to adulthood. What time in your life is that? And I think, honestly, one of those things that from a federal perspective that was incredibly helpful for a lot of the transition to adulthood, a decision to allow individuals to stay on their parents' health insurance until age 26 made a huge difference, because then you were able to carry on into your mid-20s before you had to start having a job that was tied to your health insurance, right? You could go to school, you could, be a struggling artist, you could do whatever you needed to do, but you still knew you had that safety net of healthcare. So I think I always kind of try to map on what are the critical sensitive periods and what are the policies that could make it better, or what are the policies that were enacted that did make things better? The other concept that's really, really important that I've mentioned a lot is this cumulative impact. So multiple stressors over time definitely have an impact on health and development and how healthy you are later on in your life. So say, for instance, and I've kind of used this example already, but you have this little boy has a parent that passes away, that could definitely be negative. This individual then in early high school starts using drugs and gets addicted to a painkiller, and but then gets some support and ends up being able to graduate college. So we have a protective factor. But what is that cycle that could be then going on in that individual's life, right? Of maintaining sobriety, maintaining recovery. What is that life cycle then for that individual's child? So the cumulative impact is we had 2 early life experiences that really could have a negative impact. What happens if that parent didn't pass away until this little boy was in his adult years, right? That there's a much different trajectory then based on those health impacts. So by a show of hands, I've always asked this every year. Who's heard of the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study? ACEs. Anybody heard of ACEs? Okay, great. Every year, more and more people have heard of it. So the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study looked at, and this was done around, I want to say it was first published in like 1999. And it was out of Kaiser Permanente Health System, which is a large healthcare system in California. And it's mostly employed individuals. So we have to take that into consideration. And it was mostly white or Caucasian ethnicity. And they looked at whether or not individuals self-reported having these areas of childhood challenges. So did you experience physical, emotional, or sexual abuse? Did you experience any type of neglect? And did you have these areas of household dysfunction? So divorce, parental incarceration, substance use disorder, and the like. And so they looked at this data. And I want to point out that this woman here, just as an aside, this is Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. She's amazing. Check her out. She's a pediatrician who is a huge advocate for understanding ACEs and screening for them to make changes to our clinical practices to support getting children the needs and to prevent adverse childhood experiences. I put on Canvas a link to her TED Talk. It's about 16 minutes, or her TEDx talk. It's phenomenal. You guys will fall in love with her. She's wonderful. Definitely recommend watching it. But Nadine Burke-Harris, she is amazing. But the results of this initial ACEs study was that almost 10,000 people responded. So we know from a research perspective, that's a heck of a lot of people, right? That's a wide audience. We learned that over 50% of those people had at least one adverse childhood experience. Like, holy cow, that's a lot. A quarter of those people had 2 or more. And we're talking about people who lived in relatively, middle-class America. And the more categories and more ACEs, this is the real takeaway from the study. The more ACEs you have, the higher your risk over time. So it's not causation, but it's definitely a correlation that we saw from this study on a large scale. This study has been replicated over and over and over again. We also learned from that study initially that if you had 4 or more childhood ACEs, your chances for health risks are exponentially higher than if you didn't have those number of ACEs. So health risks for alcoholism, drug abuse, depression, suicide attempts are 4 to 12-fold. That's huge risk factors, right? 4 or more ACEs, you're more likely to have more than 50 sexual intercourse partners, more likely to have physical inactivity and obesity. And we all know, hopefully by this point in your lives, you know that smoking is like the precursor to all of the problematic health outcomes. Like, there is nothing that is worse for your body than smoking, and especially your cardiovascular health. And so that leads definitely high rates of smoking with 4 or more ACEs. So how do we do this? How do we prevent ACEs, right? Over time, we've also come a long way in looking at, there's more to adverse childhood experiences than just those initial ACEs that were identified in the study. And I love this tree image because it talks about those initial ones: domestic violence, mental illness, divorce. But then what about under the surface? What about discrimination and racism? What about quality and affordability of housing, which for many in our country still is a problem? just that lack of opportunity for upward social mobility, and the violence, not just domestic violence, but the violence in your neighborhood also are those adverse community events or environments. And so I love this image, and I just want you guys to think about this. Every person that walks through our door, this is what we're seeing. So this was a few years ago, and I will mention this research is, I want to say it's over 5 years old, but I haven't found anything newer. And this work was done from Joining Forces for Children. And so if you just Google Joining Forces for Children, it's a group that's based out of Cincinnati Children's, collection of pediatricians, social workers, lots of people that are interested in preventing childhood adverse experiences. And they looked at the national average at the time of 2 or more ACEs in kids was about 22.5%. In Ohio, we're a little higher than the national average, but in Cincinnati, we're even higher than that. Almost 1/3 of the kids that walk through our doors have had at least 2 adverse childhood experiences. That is a ton, you guys. And as someone who was born and raised in this area, those kids, they become the parents that bring their kids to this hospital. So those parents then having 2 or more adverse childhood experiences as well. So when we think about, we tend to get jaded in our fields of, oh, well, that parent didn't do the homework. Well, yeah, that parent didn't do the homework because they're trying to survive, right? Like they have historical trauma. They've had issues. Maybe they're in a fight with the grandparent and they have no support. So just be thinking about that. And I always want you to think through the lens of the people that walk through our doors have a great deal of trauma and a great deal of adverse childhood experiences, even if on the outside, it may not appear that way. So I have another video for you guys because I love this. And it's just a great depiction of systemic racism, because as we think about adverse childhood experiences, it's cumulative and multiplied for when we think about systems that exacerbate and maintain systemic racism. So I'm going to play. Nope, I'm not going to play that video. Why am I not going to play that video? Come on. No. All right. Hold, please. It was embedded yesterday. On it. Staying with me? Do we need to run down? We're almost done with this part, actually. But since our people close at 2 now, hopefully you already got your soda or your coffee, or you can move around. And it always does this. It like defaults to Japanese subtitles on me. Every time I play this, I'm like, why? And the subtitles aren't the best because they are auto-generated, so I apologize. Where is my share? Nope, I'm gonna share this one, but you guys can't see this yet. Oh, sorry. One of the biggest things, I think that if you're not knowledgeable about redlining practices in this country, definitely explore that more, because health is derived from wealth. And if you can't own land, you cannot generate wealth. You cannot generate equity. And therefore, you don't have that ability to save and have a nest egg that you pass on to the next generation. So I think redlining is something that is a little bit outside of what we plan to talk about today, but because it was in the video, I want to bring that up. That if you don't know a lot about it yet, we will have another session on social determinants in a few weeks, but I wanted to make sure that if nothing else, it's something that is absolutely essential for you to understand going into this field, is understanding how the systems have been built to discourage African-American people to be homeowners in this country and in the city. I think the other thing that this video did miss a little bit, and it kind of got at it there towards the end, is the idea that Indigenous peoples, we don't have reservations near us here in Cincinnati, but Indigenous peoples and the historical trauma in those communities, what did we learn about them growing up, right? There's high suicide rate, there's lots of alcoholism. Did we learn much else? Their land was stolen from them, right? Their land was stolen from them. We are now sitting on it. We are living on it. And the impacts of that on the indigenous peoples. And again, we don't talk about it here as much in Cincinnati as we should, because we don't have those patients walk through our doors. But I can tell you, our colleagues in Minnesota, it is on the forefront of what they do because they have so many patients. So depending on where you may go in your career, you really have to be mindful of First Peoples and the indigenous experiences of those of the community around you, because the historical trauma is real and pervasive in those societies. And then they're forced to live on reservations where maybe they don't want to, but that is where they've been told by our government, you have to stay, right? If you want to protect some of your historical culture and values in your society, you get to live on this land that nobody else wants in the middle of North Dakota. So jump off my high horse a little bit, but it's important. It's very, very important for us to understand. Let me get back to the slides because I wanted to point out one thing really quick that I think I brushed off too quickly in this slide. So when we think about the volume of kids in Cincinnati, the reason I have these school buses on there is that we could fill 408 school buses to the brim with the number of kids in Cincinnati that have had at least 2 ACEs. So over 20,000 children. And that number has obviously grown since COVID. So 408 school buses. I mean, that would be the longest parade ever, right? So I just wanted to have you guys think through that. So as we talk about ACEs, then you layer that with disability, then you layer that with racism. And a lot of people have that intersectionality of all of these identities and all of these experiences, as I think Dr. Kara had introduced a few weeks ago. But that intersectionality piece, you can't tease anything apart. They all are cumulatively impactful on each other. So I want you guys to think through that today. I want us now to see if there's any questions and then take a break. But before we take a break, I wanted to, no, we'll just take a break. I'm reading the room. We need a break and then we'll come back and we'll set up our activity. Does that sound good? Yes. Okay, cool. And if you have questions, let's save them for after the break. Does that sound okay? All right.
What is that? Oh.
Jay, I don't know if you can hear me. But if you could come down at some point and help me figure out how to get the people back, that would be awesome. No.
That's how I don't know exactly how accurate all of it was. But like, I've heard that's where my knowledge. Yeah. I feel like it's like a big thing. Like 5 years before. Right, so 16. Right, Charles. Yeah. Charles would be. I mean, he's also pretty old. Yeah. So then, I think you're gonna be a team captain. You're gonna be a team captain. Yeah. I mean, I know the number of letters I've yeah, healthy food options. I like had all of the data and then like happened where I was like gonna go to the town like like if people like how hard to direct yeah just like now oh we got a direction no and I saw that guy walk from the all the way clear opposite side. And it's like a former, like. It was. It was awful. And like Harvard. There's nothing. This one I was. Oh, completely.
Yes, completely.
My high horse.
Yes.
I'll get off.
Yes, no, I feel you on it. I feel you.
Jen? Not Jen, Steph.
Well, I get that a lot. Yes.
I was just, this something I wanted to share. Interesting talk. It's about running, luck, and the ovarian lottery. I don't know if you have heard that. It's about 20 minutes, but it's really interesting. And it's along the lines of what you just discussed with us. If you want, I can share the link in the chat.
Yes, yeah. Can you repeat it one more time? I think I missed the first part of what you said.
Running, luck, and the ovarian lottery. It's
Oh,
about
okay,
how
yeah.
opportunity breeds opportunity. So
Yep. No, yeah, please put that in the chat box and we'll share that out.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, just ignore that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, we'll come back in about 1 minute. Love your pants, Maria. Those are so cute. Okay. All right. No idea what you guys can see. Can you guys see the slide deck? Doesn't have the green line around it.
I can.
You can. It says movie clip activity.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Of course, being weird today again. So, the folks that are in the room, we are going to do one activity, and I've already set out some game board bags and pieces on our team captain's desks. So I will organize you guys after I get these folks into breakout rooms. For the folks that are in Zoom, what I'd like for you guys to do is have at least one person go on to, oh, I shared the wrong thing. Go on to Canvas and pull up option 2, movie clip activity. And it is in today's Canvas link under life course perspective. And then under course materials, option 2, life course.
I have that up. I have that
Okay,
up.
great. So I'm gonna, at least one of you guys to have you have it up so that you can get to the links of the movie clips in there. What I'd like for you guys to do is, as a group, have somebody pull up the movie clip, share your screen so everybody can watch it, and then discuss what you're seeing in terms of these, and I'll leave them up on the screen so you can take a picture or you can use the slides, but the different terms that we discussed today. So life course, risk and protective factors, pathways and trajectories, cumulative impact, all of those things I would like for you guys to discuss based on the short video clips that you saw. So that is my alternative to the gameplay, which I actually like both of these activities. I can only take credit for coming up with the movie clip activity because somebody else created the game. So, but in person, we'll play the game and then we're going to come back together and share our experiences at the end. So I am going to leave this up for those in Zoom land so that you can see the terms, take a picture of it with your phone, and then I'm going to put you in small groups in breakout rooms so that you don't have to talk over each other or hear what's going on in this room. And then I'll get this room started. Questions from Zoom land?
So we watch all the clips. There are 7
Nope.
of those.
I would just say, that's a good question, Tulika. I would say start with one of them. You don't have to go in order. Pick one that the group decides on. See where your discussion takes you. I'll give you a 5-minute heads up. So if you get to more than one, that's great. If you get to the whole list, that's great too.
Okay.
Just an FYI, because I was in Zoom land on Tuesday, it's helpful if you tell them how long they have. Like, just we're gonna do this for 15 minutes, we're gonna do this for half an hour.
Okay, we will.
You were doing one thing and it popped up.
Like, oh, it's time to go? Yep, okay. So I would definitely say we are gonna do this activity until at least half past the hour. So at least till 2:30, if not 2:35, but I'll come back on at 2:30 and either pop into your rooms or send you an alert via the broadcast messaging.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for that heads up, Johnny. All right, and your rooms, there's just 2 rooms and there's 5 of you in each room. Okay, so those of you that are in the room on that activity, so somebody likely in that general vicinity who has a microphone or somebody from this team who's close to this microphone, if you guys could give just a quick summary of the life course game and for the people in Zoom, and we'll do the same when we talk about their experience and their activity. Who wants to? Amy, go for it.
I can do it because the mic is right here. Just describe the game for the Zoom folks. So everyone got a kind of profile at the beginning of the game, which talks about their background, their parents' background, their birth, all that stuff, and gives you a label of advantage, disadvantage, or neutral. And then throughout the game, you land on things that either like good, positive things happen and you could move forward, negative things happen and you would move back. And those were impacted at some points by your advantage, disadvantage. And so when we were playing, Ramya was the player in our team that was advantaged and was way ahead of us for most of the game. And then didn't finish first, but still ended up with the best outcome at the end. So it was very interesting.
Thank you, Amy, for giving the overview. That's a great description of, you can see the game board in Zoom land, but ultimately there's these large game boards. And I just want to point out that if any of you have an interest in teaching this or taking it home to educate your uncle at Thanksgiving on systemic racism and privilege, this, yeah, I know everyone's like, absolutely not. But this is a great activity that I think is thought-provoking, but also meant to be more so about this debrief and what you take away later and you think on and you reflect on after the session is over more than anything. But those red pieces are things like, oh, the grocery store just moved out of your neighborhood and now you have a food desert. Or the green ones, I loved Katie's group that were like, free condoms passed out at high school, woohoo, right? So it's those kinds of things that hopefully you got some experience seeing some of the public health strategies, some of the individual health strategies that go on in communities to help bolster the whole population. So other reflections from folks in the room, that you'll remember that card because of something. Some example on a card that you're like, wow, yeah, that really makes a difference. Or, oh my gosh, that was really harmful to my life. Yeah, Bethany. Yeah, probably get the microphone being in the back there.
So I know in our group, I had the purple character, and at first I lost Medicare, so I had to find a new provider. But then every clinic in my whole entire neighborhood shut down. So it was like, well, now I have no healthcare at all. And that just made me think a lot about, like, again, access to healthcare and like what that looks like, and the abruptness of even losing your provider because of insurance. So that was something that I took away, like, wow, that was really thought provoking.
Absolutely. And thinking about that from our patients' perspectives, that can really happen. And it almost did recently with some of our Ohio marketplace programs. I don't know if you guys saw this in the news. I knew it wasn't going to go through. I knew they were going to strike a deal at the 11th hour. And sure enough, everything was supposed to expire on September 1st. And like on August 28th, Children's in Ohio Marketplace said, yeah, we have a deal now. Like that literally was over 100 families that are seen by our institutions concerned. Like, where's my child going to get care? Jody, you're going to have something else to add to that?
Exactly. Well, Ramya had a card, which I thought was really interesting, where, so she was privileged and she was in a car accident.
Yep.
Because,
Go ahead, keep going, keep using the microphone. Yeah.
Because she had insurance, she lived and survived, but we read if she had not, it was one of the rest of us, she would have been dead.
Yes.
And the game would have been over for you.
Car insurance, health insurance, these are things that there was a reason that the Affordable Care Act was so strongly debated, and why the disability community was so strongly in favor by and large, because without insurance or without those caps on premiums, people literally could not afford to survive, right? And so that is why that piece of legislation that was passed in the Obama administration was such a big win for the disability community. So again, another thing, if you're not aware of the impacts on the disability community, do some research outside of Len time to just educate yourselves on why the Affordable Care Act is so, so important to our community. Other cards or things that stuck out, Lisa?
I had a card, I think it might pick up. I had a card where I don't remember what the action was, but I then had to subtract 1 from every time I rolled thereafter because I was disadvantaged.
Yeah, so something that made you then have an impact on every life decision or every life circumstance from there on out. Absolutely. So those early life or critical period happenstances that might have an impact later on. Katie, did you have your hand up?
Yeah.
Real loud, or we need to bring her the mic.
Part of the game that was really frustrating was I was stuck at a point where it was like, you get a red card and then a green card. It's like, oh, something good's happening. And no, then something bad happens. And then something good happens. And it just kept going. It was really frustrating. I'm like, this is just a game, but like that happens
all the time
too. Yes. I would say I get to avoid probably a lot of these things because of my, my
inherent privilege. Yeah, absolutely.
But I can imagine that it's like, oh, I'm finally starting to get ahead, and then this thing like knocks you back again.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, this simulation is meant to just be an example, but you bring to the point, Katie, of even this was a game and it brought up these emotions in me. Imagine if this was really my life, my child's life, my parents' lives, right? Like these are real examples of things that our patients and families experience every day, multiple times a day. So other final reflections on the game, Maria?
So the fact that the person that had the advantage was always going to be the first, or like the person with the better outcome, and the neutral person will be always the second, and the disadvantaged people will be
in the back. Yep.
And it is determined with the card that they got.
Absolutely. And I think that is so much of that systemic piece, right? It's the way in which the systems are designed to promote everything for people with more money, more power, or more perceived power in our society, right? And so hang on to that thought about like, this game set it up that way, but many of you, the red piece didn't win, right? It didn't get to the end point first in many occasions, which is real life too, right? But think about that when we critique this theory and its deterministic kind of issues that we hear. Awesome. Well, thank you again. If anybody ever wants to borrow these, make sure that I get them back so I'm not today and a year from now hunting for them in someone's random office like I was today. But I think these are a great experience to borrow and teach other people. So how about, and I apologize for those, well, we're going to do this for now so that we can all see you in Zoom land. So I know that there was 2 groups, so I'd love to have somebody come on and describe just the activity that you all did in your Zoom rooms for the folks that are in the room here.
Okay, I can do that. So we were given a couple of movie clips to watch, as many as we could, and critique what we saw in those movie clips in terms of the various factors that affects a person's life course, and just analyze and discuss the different characters and situations in the movie. So
thanks, Talika. And somebody else jump in and maybe describe one of the clips that your group discussed.
Hi.
Hi, Jesse.
So we actually watched 3 in our group. Unfortunately, we had a hard time with Slumdog Millionaire. It didn't show as much of the movie as Forrest Gump and Precious, but both of those were really great. Precious in particular, she had a lot of aces, just an overwhelming number. And we tried to fit there was a slide that was the life course discussion, like her risks, her protective factors, the trajectory of her life, and the cumulative impact. We talked about how her pregnancy, her physical health, like she was obese, she was pregnant, she was HIV positive, very abusive home life, and how all of those things came together and impacted her. And then her social worker and especially her teacher in that class really made an impact and changed the trajectory of her life. We felt like that teacher in particular was a protective factor for her.
I love it. Yeah, exactly. And I'm glad that Jessie jumped in as a clinician herself. She's a nurse practitioner. Sometimes those video clips are the snapshots we get in an office visit or in a therapy session or in a diagnostic interview. And we have to make our best clinical educated recommendations based on a little snapshot of what we see in a person's life. And so I really recommend checking out some of those movies that are on that list. So it's listed on Canvas, but it's things like, I mean, Forrest Gump is like what, the most famous movie ever aside from Titanic. So like you've probably seen Forrest Gump. So many different life course pieces to break down in Forrest Gump. There's Precious, Slumdog Millionaire. Again, Jesse mentioned it's kind of hard to grasp from just the trailer, but the whole movie is really, really cool. The Other Sister, this was a late 90s, early 2000s classic. One of the first depictions of disability outside of Rain Man. A young woman with intellectual disability living a very privileged life, but basically her mom wanting to shelter her. So kind of talking through that scenario and how I see that play out a lot in our young adult patients. It's like, no, we don't. We want you to be independent, but we really don't want you to be that independent. And I see Talika smile like, yep, yep. So just check those out. I think it sounds like the groups on Zoom really kind of met the task and dug in with just that small piece of framework of what you have on a patient. And then when you think about it too, sometimes all you get is that, but then you can go back and use the medical record, or you can go back and talk to the team members. And so those movie clips are just a microcosm of what we're going to be doing in the ITT course, because we're going to be able to use our tag a team friends to say, what did you learn from that family? Or what was their social determinants that really impacted this case today? Or why did they all of a sudden decide now's the time to get their child evaluated? Was it just because we were offering it for free, or what's making them really go forward now to get the support? So Yeah, definitely check those out. And again, if you ever teach, use that activity. It is not just say, hey, yeah, shout out to Steph Weber, but it is never anything that anything you learn in Lend, take and share. Take and share. It is not a, oh my gosh, you can only do it here. No, no, no. We don't live that life. Take and share. Talika, you come off mute.
I have to say something, Steph. I just wanted to thank you because as a parent, sometimes it's very easy for us to complain that that particular doctor, that particular clinician did not really get me or get our family very well. But just now that you mentioned that we have to just watch the trailer, it's very similar to that for you guys to, you know, when you meet a family, it's basically just glimpses or snapshots, and then you have to create a whole picture of the family and start your diagnosis or like, you know, treatment from there. It does give me a perspective of the other side, like, you know, as a clinician, what exactly is it that you see? While we go in saying, oh, we gave them all the information, but what actually you're getting is just a trailer of our whole situation, and you have to like put the pieces together and actually create a picture that makes sense. So it's a good perspective as a parent or a family member to have of what's
excellent.
the other
Thanks,
side.
Talika. Yeah, thanks for your insights. I think that's really powerful for the clinicians in the room to hear, and then also the other people with lived experience, right? Yeah, we're all trying to do the best we can with oftentimes limited time, money, and resources. Let's always consider that, right? So excellent. Let's see. As we wrap up, I don't need to put the slides back up, but I just wanted to kind of, come on, get your, well, the slides are going to come back up in the room, but I really wanted us to be able to see our friends. So let me do this. What would you say is missing from what we talked about today? Any concepts, any impacts about what you would consider from your discipline that we maybe haven't talked about in either the life course game, the discussion, the lecture, or the movie clips? Any concepts?
Resilience.
Yeah, so Michelle says resilience. Maybe speak a little bit more to that.
I guess just the concept of regardless of all of those stressors, that there could be something that is formed in the individual or in a relationship that allows them to work through all of that stuff and actually prevail.
Yes. So it's not as simple as just protective factors, but it's the interaction between protective factors, biological, psychological opportunities, all intertwined together that kind of evoke what that resiliency actually
Much better.
is.
Yes.
Well, I think resiliency is really hard to describe and really hard to study. And I always joke that I actually did my psychology internship at Devereux, which is a center outside of Philadelphia, and they have the Devereux Center for Resilient Children. And I'm like, huh? I was there and I still don't really know what resilience is, right? It's so hard. That's why I really enjoy Brene Brown's work, because she tackles shame and these heavy emotions in a way that are understandable and digestible that I think are just really complex to study and to describe. But resiliency is definitely one of them. So yes, the great point that it's not just protective factors, like it's not just a transactional in protective factors, out risk factors. It's this conglomeration of so many factors that override each other. Talika, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
While we were discussing the movie clips, we also realized that a lot of factors actually kind of bleed into each other. So like one aspect may fit into two categories as well. So there's an interplay between
yes,
factors.
Absolutely. And I think that that's so important too, to also consider from an interdisciplinary perspective, those factors overlap with each other, and the people that can help also overlap too. So just because you have this going on in your life doesn't mean we can't address it in OT. You don't have to sit on a wait list for mental health services when we could potentially start scratching the surface with an occupational therapist, right? Or vice versa. So I think that that's what's really cool too about some of the work that we particularly do. So in the end, I want to give you guys a few minutes before our next speaker, but I just want to end, and these are on the slides for you, the key questions that I want you all to be thinking through. Again, today I just threw a lot of things at you, but not like, how do we fix it? So I want you guys to be thinking through over the next few weeks, how and why do health disparities across populations exist and persist? Why do they continue on? What is the status quo, and why is the status quo allowed to happen for them to continue? What are the factors that might influence the capacity for individuals, groups, populations to reach their full health potential? And then how are you going to apply this? So this is one of those kind of things where hopefully you'll take Life Course and embed it into your brain, and now it's shaped the way you think about all the families you see. And how is that going to continue to impact the work that you do with children with special health care needs and whatnot? So thank you all for your attention. Hopefully it was interactive and you got a lot out of it. And then I see Dr. Myers is here. So we are going to take 5 minutes. And then those of you who are here for SCBM, we will get going at right around 3 o'clock. Okay, so thank you guys. Don't forget to fill out your evals. Those are very, very important. Very, very important.
I might learn more about